going back to one of your earlier questions as well, Amy, around, will innovation continue at the pace? And actually, it's kind of linked to a comment that Pete made as well. I think innovating and experimenting is actually the easy part. The real challenge sort of comes when you hit on something that works in a controlled group, then you have to scale it. Right? I think that's the piece that is going to really challenge some organizations, because that's when you need to start thinking about, well, okay, am I going to bet the farm on this new piece in this new business model? And how do I keep the two speeds of my organizations going? How do I keep the business as usual and the lights on business that are the ones that are going to keep my shareholders happy for the next 3 months and then the next 3 months? And then how am I going to create innovation at scale, which is going to be the 24 to 36 month kind of equity play for the businesses? So I think that's where some interesting collisions are going to come, when they've got to really think carefully about scaling experiments, frankly.
Yeah, I guess it's almost not a case of brands needing to create new innovation hubs and innovation centers. It's doing it alongside their day-to-day. And, for now, that may well be easy for them to do it in the here and now, but it's, say, scaling it up and keeping that as part of their everyday as they go on.
But it requires a fundamental change, right? I think it was 4 years ago that the CEO of Audi said in 5 years, 50% of our revenue will come from services. And I think before COVID, they were on track. But all of a sudden, they're going to have to push even harder. But in order to do that, they had to move from being reliant on making tin and shifting tin to creating value for their customers around an ecosystem that happens to have a piece of tin in the middle. So it's a shift in mindset for enterprises to think about how they create value for their customers and, of course, the stakeholders in their business. So I think it's a fascinating time.
And it's definitely, you've got a tail of legacy systems and applications in the back that people are trying to bolt this new innovation to the front of. And there lies the challenge, really, of the two opposing worlds, because you've got companies, especially in the large financial services and utility sector, that have grown through acquisition. Their integration hasn't particularly been that successful between these businesses. So you've got a multitude of back-end systems and processes, which are now trying to bolt on a very data-rich CCM delivery model on top, but coming from very different starting points and very different data silos. And I think trying to keep to a point where you can deliver this in an automated way, in bulk and industrialized process, is a challenge. And I think that data translation piece is going to be a problem for years to come, because there are still companies out there running on very old legacy systems, and that this new technology is hard to deliver on those platforms. So providing that middle layer of transformation to get you there from a maturity perspective is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we often talk about digital, but when it comes to the digitization of services, it's a service design challenge. It's not a digital challenge. It's about, the bigger challenge is what sits behind the digital interface and what else needs to happen. If you can't make those changes, then having the most beautiful digital interface in the world is not going to make an ounce of difference to your business. So we see that as well, and it sometimes takes time for clients to kind of understand that and come on that journey. And obviously, people, so often individuals are resistant to change, and it's hard to change large organizations with legacy systems and set ways of doing things. But we are seeing clients who realize that, if their branch is closed, there is no way to deliver a service other than if they develop a digital service. So that, it means that they have to do it now. And once they've done it, once they've proven that they've done it, why wouldn't you continue to do it? So it is a really interesting time where digital transformation, I think, is become vogue again, where it kind of the terminology at least had gone out of fashion, but it's definitely come back. And I think where it's going to be about innovation, and it's going to be about adaptability, and it's going to be about capturing growth, but it's also going to be about digitizing current services to make sure that you can continue to deliver a decent level of service to your customers and continue to deliver revenue and value to your shareholders.
It was a really interesting, if anyone's had their LinkedIn open today, you would have seen the piece on essentially high street banks, how many clicks it opens to take how many clicks to open an account. And I think actually this illustrates the point beautifully, right? I think it was, I won't call out the company that had 127 clicks, but they were, I think, owned by HSBC and one of the first direct banks. But they were over 100 clicks to create an account. And then, you know, predictably, at the top end, you've got Monzo, Starling Bank, who were born digital banks. They were banks in a box. But essentially, they've gone to market going, okay, so what problem do we need to solve? And then they've managed to do it in a much, much more streamlined fashion. The challenge legacy companies, and not just banks, have is they've got all this baggage in the corner that they still think is really important, and it's not. But they've got to get through it in order to get to the customer and serve them the things that they need to have. So I think that's the challenge. How do you create the value as quickly as possible with the least friction? And that's what companies are going to have to do a lot faster.
Definitely, yeah. No, I think that's really interesting. Really highlights, you know, the difference between digital ready, and I think you've actually used a phrase before, Lorenzo. So I'm just going to pull out, which is the kind of the tech disruptors and the disrupted analogs, and you've taken from elsewhere as well. But yeah, I just think that, you know, it does really summarise where we're at the moment.
Well, it does. I mean, you know, unfortunately, the four dominant companies in the world, Facebook, Amazon, Google, Netflix, whatever you want to call them, they are setting the pace for every other company. You know, Amazon are going after every single sector that they believe is big enough for them to create enough equity for their stakeholders over a 20 to 50 year period. So any industry that is even close to an industry that Amazon might want to get into does really need to think very, very carefully about how they're going to compete with a company that essentially can afford to take on industries, take a loss, but deliver a service that is infinitely better than an incumbent might be delivering. So I think, you know, again, this was part of the narrative of transformation 10 years ago, but it's even more important now because they've moved further and faster ahead of the pack. And it's, you know, the dominance is quite scary.
And that's the challenge that you have where customers, suppliers were supplying services to customers which were more face-to-face. So they were saying that online stuff is all great, but come get the personal touch from us. And what the recent events have shown us, that actually when that is taken away or limited or removed completely, all you're left with is your tech.
Yeah.
And actually the lack of investment in tech is now showing in certain arenas and industries, because they've had that focus on the face-to-face approach. And I think it's really opened people's eyes now to say that is a great strategy, but the tech has to be there or you are going to suffer, and that's what we're seeing.
But you're right, the companies that are thriving at the moment are the ones that sell products and services, but they're immaterial, right? Generally, they're either immaterial services and products, or they're material products that are massively enabled by digital and technology. So, and I think that's the paradigm shift. Right.
What sort of, just to sort of move along, we can obviously talk about this for hours, but what questions do digital leaders need to ask themselves, and what they require from their teams to share a frictionless transition period at the moment?
I think the key question any sort of leader in a business should be asking is, am I doing enough to drive value right now? That you know, that's got to be the key question. Am I doing everything I can to drive value and everything I can to my customers? And if the answer is no, they should be thinking about what they can do, what they should be doing differently to better serve customers and unlock that value. Because if leaders don't ask themselves that question and don't work with the teams to figure that out, somebody else will capture the market share and will capture that value.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of this will depend on where people are in the maturity model, and how mature their offering is in the marketplace. Because I think that posed at different levels will provide different results. So I think the lower down people are on the maturity level, both on a kind of single communication view and that multi-channel delivery option, if they're not in that position yet, I think they can move very quickly. I think people that are further up to actually squeeze more benefit from the existing benefits of investment that they've had, and actually squeeze some more ROI out of those previous investments. I think they're the ones that are going to need to challenge, and I think they're the ones that are going to need the internal challenge really to the team to say, from an operational perspective, how do you get more efficiency from what we're already doing? How do we sweat that asset a bit more from those existing teams? And I think from a lower end of maturity, we're going to see a lot more of the direct outsourcing, because they were so far behind the curve, as it were, that actually scaling up, getting the technology stack in place, doing it yourself in-house is just not going to be an option to catch up. So they are the guys that are going to that will be looking at outsourced partners to deliver that. The people in the middle of the scale is where that will become consultancy. And that will be where we can offer the support from both a operational planning strategy from digitalization, but also strategy about how you manage those contents. So I think the question to the internal teams will depend on where people are on the maturity of their outbound comms. But I think it's all about trying to get more out of your current investments.
So my views are, I think if you're a digital leader right now, the first thing is you're waking up going, finally, I don't have to pitch every single thing and get it thrown back in my face by the business. I think, all of a sudden, digital leaders are people that are being looked at, really listened to, and actually saying, okay, get on with it. So I think the first thing is they're having to dust off a few of the plans and proposals that they probably had ready and waiting for a while, and being actually asked to execute on them. So I think that's a great thing for people that are in digital leadership positions. But I think for me, there's sort of 4 areas that companies need to ask themselves. Number one, do you have, are you working on a digital strategy that's connected to your business strategy? Number 2, what kind of business models do you want to be looking at? How far reaching do you want this digital initiative to go? Then once you've looked at that, how does your current set of data, technology, skills, ecosystem, partners, how does it map to what you're trying to do? And then finally, how's the organization aligned, and how's the culture to actually move forward at pace across multiple dimensions, because it's going to be pretty hairy. So I think for me, there's those 4 big areas that they've got to look at in order to make progress in both the short and the long term. Then there's, to Ross's point, there's you do this stuff to grow the business, and you do this stuff to save money. So I think also understanding where you are on that cycle, are you in such a cash crunched position where actually the only thing you can look at right now is driving efficiencies through the business, because your cash flow is, actually killing you. So then that mandates you've got to be looking at the efficiency drivers and savings first, but you can't ignore the growth levers, because that's where you've got to get to. But of course, you've got to save the money and buy yourself some runway first. So I think that's how I'd be framing what questions to be asking.
Yeah, great. So to summarize, if each of you could sum up the current ecosystem in just one word, what would it be and why? Ross, start with you.
Me. I think for me, the ecosystems that I'm seeing out there, integration, I think, is the one word I would use for the ecosystems currently. I think from what I'm seeing out in the marketplace, something that integrates with current business process and delivers those benefits without having to reinvent the wheel from scratch. I think what we're finding is that there are a number of solutions out there that require ground up reconstruction, and there are a number of solutions that allow us to integrate. So I think that the key word for ecosystems that explains ecosystems currently is integration and flexibility of that integration.
Lorenzo?
I had a couple of ideas in my mind in this one. I think there's some obvious ones. So I think probably the obvious one for me is fluid. I think over the next 12, 18 months, everybody's organizations have to become more fluid. And there's a whole heap of things that we're all going to need to do in order to enable that. Other than that, I kind of had Hunger Games came to mind, because I think it's just going to be a fight to the finish. So yeah, fluid is probably my sensible answer to that one.
Pete?
My word is evolutionary, because everything has changed and everything will continue to change. And the companies that can adapt to changing customer needs and changing employee needs will be the ones that are going to thrive and survive. So I think it depends where they are in their maturity curve as well, and where they're, different companies will have different focus, whether it's cost savings, whether it's driving new products and services to drive growth. But I think the companies that will do the best out of the current situation are those that have an operational model that evolves, that can help them evolve to changing market needs quickly.
Really interesting. Yeah, I think I actually picked my own word as well, and as a marketer I chose the word trepidation.
Ooh.
I think it's definitely a time when people want to innovate and reinvent themselves, but they need to question everything first and just be sure, is it the right time? Do we do it now? So yeah, that was my word.
Yeah, I can, as a marketer, and I think that's absolutely wise, because everybody's view on the world and everybody's kind of set of all our moral compasses have kind of almost just shifted in different directions. So how we're going to respond to messages as humans is probably going to change, and what we find appropriate and inappropriate from a marketing perspective, we're going to repel. We're going to see marketing messages and we're going to think they're abhorrent in the current climate, and some people are just going to carry on as normal. So I think it's a very, very tricky spot from a marketer for a little while. Lots of opportunity, but yeah, lots of danger lurking in those waters, I think.
It will go one way or the other.
yeah, definitely. But it's definitely it's an opportunity for brands, particularly brands that I think that have been intermediated previously, to connect more closely with their customers now. I think that's, probably in any kind of retail space, that's the biggest shift. I mean, D2C companies have been all the rage, let's call it, in Silicon Valley for the last 10 years, right? The Warby Parkers, the Everlanes, these companies have grown from zero to multiple £billion valuations overnight, seemingly. And it's because they're connecting with their consumers directly, so that they can understand what their consumers want and deliver it for them. Whereas many retailers that are going through wholesalers have never had that joy. So I think there's a real opportunity for some change there, and that's why people like Shopify are looking at buying JCPenney, right? Because they're thinking, right, okay, so we've got these scores of thousands of small businesses across the world that are using us as a platform to enable their e-commerce journeys. Maybe we could actually take on their logistics for them as well and give them an even bigger platform. So I think there's huge opportunities about to flow through the economy for digital as well.
But I also think expectations have been raised now as well, because people are now more accepting of the digital journey and actually adoption of the digital journey. So historically, I remember conversations that I've had with utilities, especially in water utility companies, trying to get engagement with their end customers or consumers to be involved in that digital journey when they only interact with them once or twice a year. So it's very difficult to get that stickiness in that digital journey. But actually, as a consumer now, you feel that if you haven't got that digital journey with whoever you're interacting with, whichever business, you're now questioning why and actually looking for it. So instead of companies actually having to push that digital agenda and that digital transformation with their consumers, I'm seeing more consumers asking for it and being more engaged with it. And it's being pulled the other way, which is a complete 180 flip on where we've been previously. It's been a hard slog over the last 5-6 years on that digital transformation, but it's been completely reversed. So I think that is what you're seeing, people being actively asking for it to be digitally transformed as part of their engagement, and it's going to leave our suppliers with that challenge on how to deliver that.
There was one other, I thought, an interesting stat, which was, I think, in the grocery industry over the past 2 months, 1 in 5 online transactions have been from new customers. And I think something like over 60% of those transactions have been from the older generation. And what that shows us is that you've got now a whole portion of society that was probably a bit reticent around ordering their food online. They were probably just reticent about going online, but yeah, the situation has forced it. and then it takes 4. So Ocado, so it takes 4 orders. I would imagine before the habit sets 12 weeks of a lockdown, and they don't. They're definitely going to order probably more than 4 times. So all of a sudden, you've got this whole chunk of the society that probably won't be going back for their weekly shop in Tesco's, for example, and they will be happy to transact online. So I think, the
opportunity.
The opportunity, the effect on these companies, on the online business in general, is just going to be gargantuan.
Totally.
And it is exciting.
Fantastic. Well, brilliant. That's all we've got time for today, but we obviously could keep talking about this topic for ages. So I just want to say thank you to Ross, Lorenzo, Pete for joining us, and look out for the next episode of The New Normal. Cheers.
Thank you.